Welcome to number 50. It's dirty, it's neglected, and we love it because this old house is our new house, and you can see us restore it in On the House.
In this video, we'll show you how we went about surveying the scene, restoring the timber flooring, replacing a plaster ceiling, saving ceiling roses, and renovating a Victorian fireplace. Then you'll see us fitting new skirting boards, rebuilding the leaded lights, overhauling sash windows, reupholstering a chair, casting a corbel, heating number 50 with a low-budget system, and adding the finishing touches in Victorian style. The story of number 50 will take you through jobs you're likely to face in your own restoration project when you join the growing number of enthusiasts restoring Victorian houses all over the country in authentic Victorian style. Number 50 is typical of houses built during the building boom at the end of the 19th century. Standards of construction were relatively high then and included such luxuries as an indoor bathroom and gas lighting. The house has survived 2 world wars, but time has left its scars, as I discovered when I visited number 50 for the first time.
Well, On the House has found a real challenge here. It's a textbook example of inner city decay, built in the 1880s, neglected for decades and getting worse by the hour. Nature's really taking over. We found woodworm in the floors, we've found mould on the walls, moss growing on tiles, and here we've got pigeons in the roof, and I think we don't want to share the house with them. Somebody's made rather a half-hearted attempt to keep them out here with a bit of plasterboard, but the job's far more serious than that would indicate. We have found some interesting things. I mean, behind the ancient wallpaper defending these dreadful walls here, we found a little book from 1896. Now, this house has clearly been unloved for a long time, but I'm really beginning to fall for it. There are some real gems hidden behind the grime. This little fireplace up here may look bad, but it's just been neglected. Most of this problem's just rust and lack of paint. Not really a great restoration problem. It's the kind of fireplace that people pay a lot for in architectural salvage yards, as we've seen. We can thank the owners for having neglected the house so much, really. It means that a lot of the features from the 1880s, like this little fireplace, are still intact. In the other bedrooms downstairs, they've got even grander versions of this. Very, very pretty and well worth restoring. This old house is really generous with space. There are 3 large bedrooms on this floor. The low ceiling here is because of the attic room upstairs, and there's 1 more room on this floor, very squalid. The bathroom. Just look at it. I think the only genuine Victorian feature is the mould we've cultivated on here. The bath itself is cast iron, looks a bit late. We have one wonderful feature here, 2 hot taps. This one, the prettier, is unfortunately broken. Before we decide to smash it up and get it out, we could have a look inside. Well, it's rusty, but got a hint of Art Deco here in this pattern. The stairs are in surprisingly good condition. There's hardly a squeak, except from the mice. If the stairs are leaning desperately away from the wall, we could have had real trouble. I need some fresh air. Oh, now that's interesting. You're more likely to see that in a Victorian factory than a Victorian house, aren't you? It's cast iron, this window frame. I imagine these cracks here are where it's rusted and the metal's expanded and put pressure on it. I like that. We'll keep that. That's good. Well, the house may look like a dump, the garden is a dump. The neighbours have really been taking advantage here. Now what can we see? A little pair of binoculars. It's quite useful for looking at the finer detail of the problems on the roof and with the chimney stacks. We've still got our original ridge tiles from the 1880s. Actually, the walls are in great condition, except right up there on the chimney where the brickwork's really starting to go. If the chimney stack's leaning, it'll need major attention. This room, the old breakfast room, I think would make a good modern kitchen. But like all the other rooms in the house, it's got problems, and they're down here on the floor. These lovely old quarry tiles are in a state of ruin. We're going to have to lift these tiles. I'd like to save them if possible. Anyway, I'm beginning to feel a bit itchy in here. And I think it's time we called in the environmental health officer to get rid of any unwanted wildlife that we've got around the house. Maybe free, it is in a lot of areas. Other times it costs, what, £7 to £31 an hour. But I'd rather have that than itches.
The Victorian fireplace in the dining room, like so many in old houses, was boarded up at some time, and the cast iron will need a lot of work to bring it back to its original condition. I think when it's restored we could give it pride of place in the front room. Someone's painted over these fine tiles, but they should clean up quite easily. I hope they're all as good as this one.
That's wonderful.
It's not just the cast iron that's been covered in paint. This impressive surround may be made of marble. Let's have a look. No, it's slate, and it's been cunningly painted to look like marble. It's been marbleized.
Hey, I think that'll look really good. It fits well in the frame as well, which is quite a good sign in an old house. It means that the place hasn't been wobbling about too much. We'll do the other side. Some of the minor details in houses like this can be really charming. This, for example, a corbel. It's covered in a lot of paint, and the problem is she's lost her twin sister over here. But I think that we could get this off, take back the layers of grime, take a cast and reproduce another one. We could use a similar system to replace some of these damaged skirtings. Actually, you can often build them up just with a rectangular plank and some OG moulding or a similar staff bead. We're going to have to install a damp-proof membrane underneath the floors, and I hope, really hope, that doesn't mean that we lose this wonderful mosaic floor which stretches from the back of the house right through to the front door. There are a few bits missing, but I guess we can salvage those from a demolition yard around here. We may also be able to salvage some replacement panes of glass for that vestibule in there. Now, one more room. Oh, nice brass door handles, a lot of those. Anyway, welcome to Woodworm City, the scene where I may vanish through the floor. The worm have really been having a good time in here. They've wrecked this floor. It's going to have to be replaced. There's a few problems over here as well. This is coming away without any great difficulty, and it's because damp's been getting in. You can see up there where it's penetrating. There's water coming in through the roof of the bay. It's a pity, really, because it's damaged what's actually rather a nice cornice that's perfectly okay in the rest of the room, and the ceiling rose in the middle is quite ornate, isn't it? Okay, it's covered in a lot of grime, but we can take it off, clean it up, and perhaps put it back in. Now, we don't want to take the bay off. We do want to save it because it's got this lovely leaded glass in here, these leaded lights, and they're not too difficult to replace, re-lead, even if they're letting the water in. Well, we're not sure to work, are we? We're going to have to decide how much of that we want to do ourselves. We're going to need all the help we can get, and some of that should be free. We can get a free survey on woodworm treatments and on damp around here. In fact, some of the work we may even be paid for it. We'll check out the availability of grants around here. But for me, one of the first jobs is going to be to locate architectural salvage and demolition yards in the area. The whole place seems to have the smell of demolition about it. And we should be able to find some useful fixtures and fittings for the house in there. A lot of work. But, you know, the funny thing is, I'm really looking forward to it.
If you're going to replace a suspended timber floor, as I'm going to here, I hope you don't come across the problems that I've encountered. I've taken off the skirting boards in order to release the floorboards. I found, incidentally, at the same time that some of the floorboards are up against a brick wall. A mistake causes damp problems. Main problems, though, are wet rot in the joists and worm in the floorboards. But look at that. Absolutely rotten. It's got to be taken away and burned immediately. It's as bad a case as I've probably seen in 20 years, this.
Here you can see we've got real problems with the ends of the joists. I suspect that this is due to insufficient underfloor ventilation, not helped by this blocked air brick. And outside, the earth piled up against the wall of the house is bridging the original damp-proof course. This soil must be removed before I put in the new joists.
I've now removed this rotten floor in the middle room and diagnosed the factors that caused all the problems and rectified them. Extra air bricks, a honeycomb sleeper wall in the middle of the room to improve the subfloor ventilation, and talking of subfloor, now 4 inches of concrete, whereas we had earth previously. I'm now going to lay a damp-proof course on the sleeper wall which supports the middle of the joists. Now I'll let that go off before laying the joists, of course. The joist that we are replacing must be pressure impregnated. This gives a much longer life to them, and the sawn ends must have at least 3 coats of the same preservative. Now that's the third one going on there. Make sure you've got plenty on. Now, this material is the same as the damp-proof course, and I'm wrapping the end of that joist to give it extra protection, making a sort of pocket. Then going to nail that tightly in, like that. Now that is fully protected and should give at least 100 years life.
To prevent the recurrence of decay, the sockets have been treated before the joists are laid. Preparation on the underfloor will ensure a professional finish, so make sure the joists are level by packing them if necessary with slate. These galvanized joist hangers are mortared into the brickwork and provide an alternative to the sockets. If you want to preserve as much of the old timbers as possible, this bower beam replaces the rotten end with galvanized steel. When it comes to fitting the longer joists, check for straightness, and if there's a bow, make sure it's uppermost so as to maximize the strength of the timber. The easiest way is to look along the edge of the joist. We've laid the joists each side of the room first, making sure that they're level with each other. All the subsequent joists are laid level with these two and finally checked with a straight edge.
The floor joists have now been laid in the middle room and in the front room. Now, because a lot of heat can be lost through a suspended timber floor, we have the opportunity of increasing the thermal insulation in this particular house. Now, unless you have to take up the whole of the floor and the joists, that wouldn't be an economic proposition. Too expensive. The materials we're using, glass wool material which comes in roll form or in a slab form, and this is held between the joists on a polythene net which comes in a roll like this. Now, to hold this in position between the joists, we use a staple gun.
I've rolled a measured length of the net onto a broom handle, making it easy to maneuver over the joists. One length of glass wool is laid at a time. The plastic netting forms a cradle, allowing the material to fit snugly between the joists.
Well, insulation all in place now, apart from the sleeper wall. In fact, you've caught me at the stage where I've laid the first 3 boards. The first one not tight against this wall. They're nailed into position, but they've been helped by the use of these cramps. Now these you can hire for £3 a day. This goes onto the joist up against a bit of timber that protects the edge of the floorboard and presses tightly and squeezes the board against the previous one. Now then, an alternative to that is to take a floorboard, a piece of oddment, cut it on a diagonal to use as wedges. Make them slightly longer than the centres of the joists, and then spare bit of timber again to act as a supportive piece, and wedge it in. Now that's tightened up beautifully. Now I'm ready to nail. You can use the traditional floor brad or a lost head, depending on what finish you're having to the floor. Where you have a joint like this, use smaller lost heads and slightly at an angle. Now, if you have pipes running along an old floor, then you'll probably find notches there. So that's the reason we keep the nails to the edge of the board. Not too near the edge, because you'll split it. And certainly don't use a floor brad on a joint. I've completed the boards now as far as the sleeper wall, and I find that some of the joists have risen away from the wall, being pulled up by the boards. Now they bounce then like this, and unless you do something about that, you'll find you have a bouncing floor. Now I'm going to put little bits of slate between the sleeper wall, and I need to lift it with a bolster slightly to be able to get that in comfortably. There we are, and one that side. Just check it. Now that's overcome that. Next thing then is to complete the insulation, and then finally the rest of the floorboards. If for any reason you have to take down a lath and plaster ceiling, it is not as difficult as you might imagine. What you have to do is to protect yourself, of course, and protect the floor with a sheet of plastic, and use the right tools. Now we have to take this one down for obvious reasons. We had water penetration and the plaster has deteriorated, not just here but over the whole of the ceiling, so the whole lot has to come down. And to make it easier to bring the ceiling down, I'm chopping out between the wall plaster and the ceiling plaster. That'll make the job easier to get the to free the lars at the end there and tear the lot down.
Always protect yourself with goggles and a face mask, as there'll be a lot of dust and plaster flying about.
There are two ways of getting the ceiling down, and I'm going to show you both ways, from above or below. Now if you can't get access above, then you have to tackle it from below, and there is a way of doing it. First of all though, I've turned off the power because I don't want to go through a cable and might even find pipework up there. So don't use a saw to make your inspection hole, use something like a wrecking bar.
Having located the joists by tapping the ceiling, start by making that inspection hole between those joists. Now in older houses like this one, where the lath and plaster ceiling has to be taken down, it's within the capabilities of a competent DIYer to replace it with a plasterboard ceiling. As soon as you can, inspect for electric cables and pipework in the space between the ceiling and the floorboards above. Even though the power is off, you don't want to cause unnecessary and costly damage.
You see, if you do find a cable, make a note of where it is and take extra care. Mind, there is an easier and a cleaner way of doing this. With a garden spade, yes? Working from up on top, lifting the floorboards and knocking down from up in that bedroom. And if you can work on the ceiling from above, only take out a few floorboards at a time, and then you've got a platform on which to work. And seal the door of the room below with masking tape so the dust and the muck doesn't get into the rest of the house. Now, if you do have cables that are going to loop down into the room, you can always hook them up onto the side of a joist. Now, a job like this, a little bit messy, but should take less than half a day, really, sealing this size. And a good tip is to de-nail the joists so that there's no risk of staining the new plasterboard ceiling.
Well, Harry made a very thorough job of getting the nails out of this ceiling. He didn't miss one. We've got to do something about it, and I don't want to fit an old lath and plaster ceiling. We're going to use the modern equivalent, which is plasterboard covered with a plaster skim. Now, sheets of plasterboard obviously have to be fitted to a flat surface. So before I could begin, I checked the entire ceiling for level with a long, straight edge. If any gaps show, I have to pack them out. I've also had to nail wooden noggings around the edge of the room to support the wall edge of the plasterboard. Sheets of plasterboard are really heavy, in fact crippling when you're trying to hold them in position while you nail them on the ceiling. So especially if you're working on your own, you may find it worthwhile to hire one of these wonderful panel holders that'll handle any size of board. We've planned this job to avoid any narrow strips at the edges, and you can see that we're fixing the long edge at right angles to the joist. That should give it maximum strength. And we're going to try and manoeuvre this in place to leave a gap of about 1/8 of an inch between the boards. Right, get up there, make a fine adjustment and nail it in place. We've cut the boards so that they'll meet over a joist, and do all your cutting down on the floor. It's a lot easier than when you're up here. And you'll notice we've got the grey side down. That's because we're going to put a plaster skim on. The other side is for dry lining or textured finishes. Now we're going to hold the plasterboard in position with these 40mm galvanised plasterboard nails, and they're going to be fitted every 4 to 6 inches. That's 100 to 150mm. Now we've got to fix the joists, every joist, and to help me get them in the right place, I've drawn a line where the joist will be to act as a guide. And when you're knocking the nails in, take care not to bruise the paper. You start nailing in the centre of the board and then work out to the edges. I'm fixing noggings between the joists here to support these edges of the plasterboard, and they're skew nailed in position. That's like that, couple at each end. Start them off down here, it's a bit easier. Until they're almost through. Now, we want it half in and half out. Hold that end. Knock this one into position. need to cut out an L shape to go around the chimney breast. We've measured and marked it up. This is the bit to go, and we begin by sawing with a fine-tooth panel saw along the shorter line. We change tools, bring in a straight edge and the knife, and we score through the paper. Lift and snap back. Now, to break it off, just cut through the backing paper. And there's the shape we need. And with a bit of luck, this will fit. So the boards are up. Now I advise you to call in a professional. Skimming a ceiling really is a skilled job, and it's worth paying to see a master of plaster racing over the boards. Make sure that he uses a jute scrim to cover the joints and around the edges to tie in the ceiling and the wall. Today's mission in the old house is to rescue roses, plaster ceiling roses. Now you can normally clean them up without taking them down, but unfortunately our ceilings are collapsing, so to save them we've got to take them down. Now I've done it once, I know how it's done, and these are the tools that I need. I also need a lot of daylight because the power's going to be off. In fact, it's going to be off in a second, then I'll disconnect from upstairs. I'm using this prop to support the load. It costs about £1 a day to hire, and they're really useful things. I've got some even more essential support, and that's a friend. This really is a two-person job. And we fixed a board to the top of the prop that's spreading the load, and above that you can probably see this foam, and that's protecting the moulding. Well, I'm through. I've had to change saw several times. None of them seems to like it very much. Traditional one's best. We're removing these laths to make it easier when we saw through from underneath. Right, we're getting near the moment of truth, and this is the dirty bit, so safety wear is essential for your eyes and lungs. I'll disappear. Hey. Yeah, I think it's free now. It could be. I'll release a bit of pressure here, and that means I need a friend up there to stop it falling down. Just lower this a little. How's it, Bob? Okay, so that's probably enough. Right, now if you could stay there, I'll go upstairs and check that it's free. Well, it looks as if we have lift off, but I'll just clean out around the joist here. And hurry back to help Bob.
I think I need to move.
Knock that off, yeah.
Good job we have the hats on.
Yeah.
I'm Okay.
Alright, I've got it. Yo, heavy. Let's have a look at it. Well, that's good, isn't it? Or will be when we get it cleaned up. We better do something about the hole in the ceiling before it gets dark too. Well, it's safely back in the workshop. Now we have to remove these decades of paint that have rounded off all this sharp detail like a fall of snow. This hairline crack here could cause problems. We'll soon see. And of course we want to remove all the paint without damaging the plaster, which means no scraping with sharp tools. And I've covered this half of the centrepiece with the stripper, so with a bit of luck we should see a classic before and after. I'll show you how it goes on. Well, there's no shortage of good paint strippers on the market, but for this particular job I found that the most effective and the most satisfying is one that brings all the paint layers off in one go. Wear gloves and have some water handy. It can hurt. Now, we apply this fairly thickly, up to about 1/4 of an inch, and we work it well into the detail. It looks delicious, doesn't it? Well, once we've got a good thick layer on there, we cover it with this special blanket which comes as part of the kit, and try to avoid any air bubbles. As you put this on, you want good contact. There. Now we just leave that to do its work as it eats slowly through the paint, layer by layer. Now the one over here has been cooking for about 3 days and should be just about ready for the moment of truth. So with the spatula, we ease away this edge. That's effective. It's hardened at the edge, you see, so we have to do that first. Now, there's some beautiful detail in here which we're picking out using water and the sharp end of the spatula that comes with the kit, and on occasion a toothbrush to get right in there. And when we've got the other half stripped and cleaned up, it'll be ready to go back up on the ceiling. Well, first the good news, it's beautiful, there's really fine detail in here. And now the bad news. Well, remember the hairline crack? You've guessed, it's split clean in two along that line. Now, I could hide this crack once I got it back on the ceiling, no problem, but we can see now that it would be dangerous to do so. This was made in the old way on the ceiling and there's no reinforcement in here. I could screw it back up to the ceiling and it could just come tumbling down again. So what do? Well, we could buy ourselves a lightweight polystyrene replacement or a finer plaster model, but we'd never get exactly this fine detail. I'm determined to save this one in some form. So what we'll do is we'll take a mould from this on the bench and cast ourselves a new one. It'll be a lot lighter and safer to put up. That's beautiful, isn't it? Look at that detail. Well, moulding and casting is an interesting process and I'll show you exactly how it's done later in the series. Having one made is quite expensive, but now we have it, I can cast endless roses for other rooms or for envious friends. We've already taken one and it's sawn in half to show you the reinforcements we've introduced. Wooden laths and Hessian scrim. Okay, let's get this one on the ceiling. I had to locate the joists inside our new ceiling. I used a stud detector for that, and I marked the joist positions on the ceiling. I offered up the rows and transferred the marks to the moulded face of the rows, so that the holes for 3 countersunk brass screws will correspond with the laths in the rows. I've scored both the ceiling and the back of the rows to provide a key for this ceramic tile adhesive which we're using to stick it up. You can use casting plaster, but it goes off really fast. This gives us some time for manoeuvre. I say us because it's time for the friendly neighbour to come to my aid again. All right, Bob, if you're ready, I think it is. That's about it, I think. Okay, your side?
Yes, that's spot on.
You got the screws?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Still hold it.
Just about.
So now you know how to salvage a ceiling rose, how to clean it up, how to refit it, and most important of all, how to overcome a disaster. Well, I really enjoyed that, and I'm sure you'll agree, all that effort's well worth it. Well, it's always a bit of an exploratory mission, taking things out of old houses. You never know quite how they're fixed. And I'm removing this plaster and the odd brick in an effort to find out. It's well worth restoring this fireplace. It'll look a lot better when we've got it all sorted out. It's in several sections, and the first one to take out is this top one. If we take the sides out first, then the whole lot could come crashing down. And that's what the mattress is for. We want to protect it, and I want to protect myself as I carry on.
Release the shelf by chiselling away the mortar holding it to the wall and lift it out. As you remove each piece, mark it for later identification. Sections of slate are very heavy, and this may be a job for 2 people. Uprights can be attached to the wall in several ways. In this case it was the common method, a metal tie at the top of each upright. The one on this side was broken. On the other side I had to cut through the tie with a hacksaw. With the ties severed, I removed the wooden prop temporarily supporting the upright and found that only ancient mortar was holding the surround to the wall. It was a simple matter to remove it. The fireplace consists of a surround, in this case painted slate, and a cast iron inset. Decades of paint had stuck them together. The cast iron inset was covered in surface rust, but not beyond repair. The original decorative tiles were still held in place at the back by mortar and a cast iron plate bolted in place.
All this tumbling brickwork may look a bit dangerous, but it's not, because what's really supporting the chimney breast is this brick arch, and that, thank heaven, is perfectly stable. Now, I'll get the fireplace back to the garage and begin restoration. Well, you don't have to be a great expert to see that restoring this cast iron fireplace is going to be a long and difficult job. I'll be calling on some professional help in a minute to make the cleaning up process last minutes rather than long days. But first, these tiles have to come out, and they're held in place from behind in a cast iron frame which is secured by 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts. Now, after a century, these are highly corroded. I may be able to remove them with the help of some penetrating oil. Give it another dose. Yeah. It broke off. The tiles are held in the frame by this white cement, which is very loose now and will probably fall apart when I remove the frame. And there they are. Well, they look a bit rough now, but I think they'll clean up okay. And now we've removed them, we can clean the cast iron insert, a much tougher job, and one where a professional blast cleaning firm can be really useful. Well, professional blast cleaner Dave Lloyd has brought his heavy-duty equipment along to us to show how the job is really done. So it's usually cheaper to take the work to him. That's a really impressive piece of equipment, isn't it? What a time saver.
Oh, yeah.
How much would a job like that cost?
If somebody brought a fireplace to us in the factory, about £20 to blast it and paint it.
Really, that seems worth it. And paint it. Is that what we do next?
Yes, it should be painted straight away with a heat-resisting paint.
What sort of other jobs do you get asked to do?
We get a whole variety. Most of our work is general engineering, but we get public coming in. We've got a very nice Victorian radiator.
That's absolutely exquisite, isn't it?
Which was so heavily painted that the pattern wasn't obvious at all. And a mangle, which is being restored for a company in Worcester who are going to have it as the centrepiece for their fitted kitchen showroom.
Not for the laundry? Not for the laundry, no. Well, you've saved me days of labour. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
I'm getting this black paint off with paint stripper, which is fairly straightforward. I'll neutralise that, but our problems won't be over even then. As you can see, the glaze is crazed, and these minute cracks are filled with colloidal carbon from the coal burning in the grate. Well, I checked with British Ceramic Tile Research and the Victoria and Albert Museum, who should know about these things, about how I can clean this out, and they said it could only be done using potentially hazardous chemicals in controlled conditions. So that is out. But they did suggest that I tried using a chrome polish to clean out the cracks. So I'll see if that does in fact work. Whatever else you use, don't try bleach, because that can get underneath the glaze, cause stains, and even lift it off. Wonderful, isn't it? The tiles cleaned up beautifully, and luckily we didn't have to buy any replacements. We did have problems with broken spacer tiles, and these are modern, but they're a very convincing reproduction of the Victorian colour. Now, another non-original feature of this fireplace is the vital clay fireback. So how did we fit the fireplace in here? Once the arched recess was clear and the hearth prepared, we were able to offer up the restored cast iron inset and position the bottom half of the new clay fireback so that it just touched the cast iron. The top half of the fireback went on next, and the space behind was filled with a mix of vermiculite and cement mortar. This allows for heat expansion and provides insulation. The slope or throat to the flue was built up with brickwork. Once the rest of the brickwork had been made good, we were ready to fit the restored cast iron inset. It was anchored to wall fixings with copper wire, then it was mortared in position. There. Well mortared in all round. Now obviously it's incomplete without its surround, and when I cleaned up the old marbleized surround I found that it was rather crude and very damaged, so I stripped it back completely. No more marbling. We could remarble it or just paint it to match the colour scheme. You remember I had to cut through a metal tie to get this thing off the wall? Well, to get it back I've got plug screws, one in the back here, another one in the wall, and there's copper wire wound around both. And down here we've got some wooden spacers that keep it vertical. Now our final move is to put a nail in here, in the loop, and twist. And this should draw it back tight. Before you cement in the fireplace, offer all the sections up to make sure everything will fit together properly. The top section simply slots into place, and the gap behind it is then filled with a weak mortar mix, coloured to match the slate. This avoids unsightly joints. The shelf is pushed well back to butt up against the exposed brickwork and laid on top of the uprights. After a final check for level, the back edge can be mortared into the wall. And this is what it was all about. A living fire to light up winter evenings and a Victorian framework for summer plants. We had to buy a cast iron grate and frets from a specialist supplier of Victorian fireplaces. These often go missing. when somebody's boarding over a fireplace. That cost us about £70, but we've ended up with a fireplace and surround worth many hundreds, and it really didn't look very promising before we removed it, restored it and refitted it here. It could so easily have ended up on a skip, and I'm delighted that it's ended up where it belongs, at number 50. Skirting boards protect wall plaster from flying feet and furniture, and after a century of abuse or a few years central heating, they may need replacing. Ours had to go because it was rotten. Now, choose a skirting board that's suitable for the room. On the ground floor of Victorian houses, they were often very tall and ornate, and you needn't be satisfied with what you can buy off the shelf from a builder's merchant or a do-it-yourself shop. You can build up your own from plain boards and mouldings. We had ours specially made by a local timber yard, and it cost us about £1.50 a foot. We're holding it to the wall with the help of this wonderful little tool by two horizontal unplaned timber battens. The lower one is that high, the upper one that high, and these battens will even off the uneven brickwork and also build out to plaster level. I've drilled and plugged the wall, and I just screw them in. We've hidden the grounds behind plaster, but we haven't lost them thanks to our little block of wood. One is just above there, the other above there. And the first piece of skirting to fix is the first piece you'd see when you come into the room. So we fixed a long piece across the bay. The reason for this is we don't want to be looking along any joins. This external angle will need an ordinary 45-degree mitre, but there, in the internal angle, we're going to have to make a scribed mitre. For those of you who haven't seen a scribed mitre, this is what it looks like, and this is what it does. If there's any shrinkage in the timber, it cloaks the opening of the joint. To help us make one, we've built this mitre box, which will cope with 9-inch boards, and we start by sawing down to the bottom of this decorative moulding at 45 degrees. And we mark with the square up to the inside of that line there. We're going to get rid of that. And we should find this piece will snap off. There it is. And there you can see the outline of the moulding, which we're going to cut out with a coping saw. Cut back parallel to this leading edge, very close to it. Take care. That's it. And now we're going to cut round here. And there we have it, a scribed mitre. Well, let's see if it fits. Oh yeah, lovely. You can see how this little whisker here is going to protect the joint if it opens a little. Now the skirting boards have to run in straight lines. The walls probably don't, particularly at the corners where the plasterers often round them off. So to establish our straight lines, we hold the skirting in position, draw a line along the floor there, inside, and against the other wall, draw a similar pair of lines here and here. And that is the inside point of the mitre. So we'll transfer that point to our board cut with the square. Draw a line up to the top, and that is where we'll cut our mitre. I'm treating the end grain with preservative, which you have to do even if the wood's been injection treated like this. Untreated timber will need a protective coat on the back before you seal it away forever. Now we're going to leave this skirting as natural timber, and we don't want any exposed screw heads, so the method we're using is known as screw and pellet, and it demands two specialist attachments for the electric drill. This is the first one, a screw sink. Makes a pilot hole for the screw and a little sink for the plug. I've marked up the positions using a template where we want to make our holes. Now we'll make them. There they are, the 4 holes waiting for their plugs. Now to cut the plugs, I'll have to change attachments. I'll need this matching plug cutter, which I'll put on the drill now. Now we can just prise these out with the screwdriver, and here are our plugs, and we're using an offcut of the skirting board itself so that the colour and grain pattern will match. There. We've glued and pinned these 2 edges together at the mitre. I've got the 4 screws in, and now we're ready for the plugs. To make them more secure, we'll give them a dab of glue around the hole. You can see that there's a chamfered button end to the plug. This should go in first, and try to match the grain precisely. Practically invisible. Well, when we've been around the whole room, pared them all down, given them a final coat of sandpaper, it should look like one continuous piece of timber. I'd be proud to show it to Queen Victoria. I really like these small panes of coloured glass in Victorian leaded lights, and you simply can't get this kind of textured glass now. Well, ours are broken, cracked and leaky, so what do? Well, we take out this whole leaded unit, take it back to the workshop and cast some Victorian light on the subject. Well, we've had it cleaned up and it's a real mess. And I want to remove this L-shaped section here so that we can get this cracked pane out. I've taken the putty away, and to tell me what to do next, we've got an expert, Nick Bayliss of Bayliss & Williams Stained Glass Studio. Now, what do, Nick?
Right, what we've got to do is get the window out. You've removed the facing putty. We've now got to remove any tacks that are in there, which, if they are pulled out, pull them out with pliers or knock them back into timber away from the lead work.
I think that's free.
That's free. Now, what we must do is then use a Stanley knife to free off any obstructions which may occur, and if there are any, as there probably are, but have a feel, yes, the panel is coming out, is then push the panel out. Right, now the glass is on the bench, we've got to remove this pane here. To do that, we must cut through the solder and the lead work down to the bottom at 45 degrees. But to do that safely, you must turn it around so you can do it with a trimming knife.
Good point.
Okay. Easily through the solder, and then as you get through it, cut downwards, so you cut through the top part of the lead. What we've actually done is cut so that we can now fold that back.
And this H-section lead is holding the whole window together?
That, solder and cement, that is what's holding the window together. Now we must turn it around and then fold the leaf of the lead back, preferably over the edge of the bench, so you can fold it down and away from the glass. Nice. As you can see, the glass is starting to come with it as you go.
It is. Yeah. Can we just remove it?
Yes, I'll preferably put some gloves on. Yeah.
Good point.
quite easy. It's all out now. Now what we've got to do is remove the waterproofing cement, use any sharp implement, probably an old nail will do actually, and just go around the inside of the lead, picking out all the old bits.
This stuff.
That's right, yeah.
Now what?
Right, the next thing to do is to cut the glass for it. Measure and cut the glass.
That fits beautifully.
That's really nice.
Now we mark up this edge, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
There.
That's right.
Marking with a felt pen.
Next thing is to slide it back out and to cut down the centre of the felt line.
Yeah. You say it's worth getting a good cut.
It's worth getting a good glass cut, to spend at least £3 or £4 on one and get one with a tungsten wheel if possible. Nice medium pressure, not too much, because the deep cut will not be a good cut. Okay, that seems fine. So the thing is now just to lift it up, apply a small amount of pressure underneath, and Bob's your uncle. Slide it in. No resistance anyway, so you've got no obstacles. The next thing to do is to lift the lead, push it up against the edge of the glass, folding the leaf back over. Okay, turn it over and you can flatten it out.
Would you need to solder on this?
On a one-off repair like that, you don't really need resolder. It's when you've got lots of repairs in one window. You can put solder on it if you want. Just use a bit of standard flux and a bit of solder, a bit of plumber's solder.
How do we make it watertight?
Watertight. Now then, what we have to use for that is some metal casement putty. It's mainly for use for glazing into metal frames. It goes off without the aid of linseed putty.
It's not very neat.
No, not yet. Next thing to do is to fold the lead down. Use any piece of wood will do it, a piece of smoothed off wood, and then that can just be smoothed carefully along the lead work. There we go.
Yeah. Alright.
Yeah, that's fine. Not applying too much pressure, otherwise you'll crack the glass again.
Right.
But turn it over and do the same on the other side. Fill it and pin it down again with the wooden tool, and then when that's been done you can go around it with a sharp implement to remove any excess putty, and then it can be brushed up and cleaned, and that's it. Yeah.
Right.
That seems clean enough.
Yeah, ready to go.
Yeah, right.
How much would you charge for this little job?
If somebody was to bring that in to me, about £8. To go out and do it on site, about £30.
Yeah.
As an overall job, repairing and rebuilding all the windows, approximately 120.
Well, our glass is fairly basic shapes, isn't it? How much would it cost to rebuild a complex one like this?
Well, something like that, saying that we've still got the central panel intact, would cost approximately £100, £150 to rebuild.
Yeah. Right. And the other one?
Well, that one is a new window. Taking design into account, I would say approximately £400 for that.
There's quite a variety of glass in these, isn't there?
That's right, quite a variety of texture, colour and lead work, making it quite an intricate panel on both accounts. Yeah.
Back to our leaded lights at number 50. Nick decided that one of the L-shaped panels was so badly damaged it needed total rebuilding. To do this, he took a paper pattern from the original panel, and using wooden battens to hold the leadwork on the bench, he built up the window one section at a time. Half-inch lead cames were used on the outer edges. Once the first piece of glass was positioned, narrower gauge cames were used for the internal framework. As it built up, Nick held the structure together with offcuts of lead and farrier's nails pinned to the bench. The lead knife, one of the few specialist tools Nick had, was used to cut and miter the came and to open up the H section where it had become compressed. Once the lead was smoothed down, a dab of solder was all that was needed to hold the leadwork together, before Nick could apply this foul-looking window cement, which is made to his own recipe. You can buy something similar. It's called lead light cement. It's brushed well into the joints to provide a watertight seal. Sawdust is then sprinkled on to absorb the surplus. It's really satisfying to watch a craftsman like Nick at work, and with a modicum of patience and practice, leaded light restoration could become part of the DIYer's repertoire. A final rub on the cames with the black grate polish, and our bay is back as it should be, watertight and lovely, and it really does look good inside with the coloured sunlight filtering through this original Victorian glass.
This front bay window shows all the classic signs of neglect over the years, and that's a pity. I've noticed that some of the bay windows in the road have been replaced with UPVC, and I think that's a pity too, because it destroys the character of these Victorian houses. Now, I think it's going to be less expensive and will preserve the character of the house if we restore rather than replace.
The bay window at number 50 has sash windows, which slide up and down in grooves in the window frame. The grooves are created by 3 sections of timber, the staff or cover bead, which is fixed into place with thin nails, and a parting bead, which separates the 2 sash window frames. This is usually held tightly in place by a groove in the frame, not glued or nailed. Our 2 frames are counterbalanced by iron weights, attached to frames by cords which run over pulleys set in the outer frame. As the window goes down, the weight, which is concealed in the box section of the frame, goes up. Repair is simple, and all the components easily available, so it's often easier to replace some of the parts.
Now, from the inside, some of the things I can see that I'll need to replace are staff bead, parting bead, certainly sash cord, which is overpainted and frayed, and fasteners. But the first part of the job is to see how easily these staff beads come off. Now, it's been painted. You need to clean off that paint and then get the chisel in to do some levering.
The tools required for removing and replacing the sash window are quite basic, and once you grasp the mechanics of the sliding sashes, the job is relatively easy. All the components are available to help you replace as much as necessary. Make weights allow you to compensate for heavier glass if you have to reglaze the windows.
Now that the staff bead is out of the way, I can lift out the lower sash. And you can see here, look, how it's fixed to the sash cord. Now, so that I don't lose the end of that cord, I'll secure it into the frame, and this hole will be hidden with the architrave later. Now I can cut with a trimming knife. There we are. Now I can do the same the other side and lift this sash out.
When replacing sash cords, there's quite a range to choose from on the market, but don't be tempted to use cheap washing line rope, which may well stretch. We used pre-stretched polyester. Now, traditional jute is also suitable, but may not last as long.
Well, slightly more restoration than I thought we'd have to undertake, in that this capping piece, as you can see, was rotten at the bottom. But it's not a structural part of the window frame, so a local joiner copied it for me, and we fitted that very, very quickly. That goes down into the garden. Now I can get on with removing the parting bead in order to get to the pocket and the weight, and to remove the top sash. Look at that. Rotten and broken. Certainly has to be replaced. Now I've removed that parting bead to give me access to the pocket behind which the weights are housed. And now the nail here, which should not be there. I mean, that parting bead should certainly not be nailed in. Now I can remove the upper sash. That cord has gone, had to be replaced, and now I can do the same with these sash cords as I did with the lower sash. Now that I've removed the parting bead, I can now take off the pocket cover, because the parting bead holds it in place. There it is. And in there up there at the moment are the weights. I've tied off the sash cord with a piece of string. I'll release the nail, and now I can let down that weight. And here's the weight coming into view. Now I can extract it. The reason for the string is twofold: to lower the weight and to introduce the new piece of sash cord. Now as I pull here, so this new piece of sash cord will take the place of the old broken one. This is pre-stretched, incidentally, this cord. And there the new cord comes. I'll cut off the string so that I can now remove the old cord from this weight and tie on the new cord. Now it's best to get a hitch on there and tie a knot in the end of it there. So that it tightly closed down on that, and that knot is not now going to interfere with the sides of that by hanging over. Now it's always a good idea to singe the end, there we are, so that it doesn't fray. I can now pull the weight back up. Now I'll pull this up at the very top, let it down 2 or 3 inches so it doesn't jam. And now the trick to measure the right length of cord is to take the sash. You can either measure it on there previously or measure it now with this cord, and it'll give you accurately where you cut.
The frames were dip stripped and primed before refitting. The leaded lights were restored by a specialist, and we'll see exactly how that was done in a later programme. I got the window back in as it was getting dark outside, and I fixed it securely until I could resume work the next day.
Now staff bead does 2 things. It holds the sash in position and it stops rattles and drafts, providing it's in the right position. Now I've overcut this slightly so that we can spring it in, so we get a tight fit at the miters. There. Now then, tight against the sliding sash first, ease it slightly so that you can get paint in there, and then I'm giving the timber work on the outside of this bay a coat of microporous paint which will help protect it for years to come. And it's in restoring rather than renewal that helps retain the character of this old Victorian house at number 50. We've had the leaded lights restored, and I've replaced as much of the timber work as was necessary. And with considerable saving in cost, it certainly made it a worthwhile project.
These 2 chairs cost me £12 each in a second-hand shop, and I think they're quite a good buy because they're structurally sound, and I've seen no signs of woodworm in here yet. The first job is to remove the upholstery, and we're going to use this as a reference when we're building it back up again. The springs in here we should probably replace. If you have to replace one, you might as well replace the lot. One problem we have is this roll on the front here, which is stitched. Now this is probably well beyond the capabilities of a beginner like me, so what I'm going to have to do is build this up with a strip of timber. What I have to make certain of is that I build it up to the correct height. Now I'll just finish taking these tacks out. Well, our chairs are of no great value, which makes them the perfect subject for a beginner to practice restoration and re-upholstery. Remember, you can destroy the value of an antique by restoring it. You can even destroy its value by over-enthusiastic cleaning. So all I'm doing on this is using a gentle method of white spirit on a soft cloth, and that'll get off the grime, but it won't touch the patina of time. Well, now that the upholstery is off, we can check the frame. You don't want to find out after you've reupholstered that the frame needed repair. But you could also fill in these tack holes. This frame's sound, but I have discovered some traces of woodworm down here, and I'm going to have to treat these, even though I hate handling this stuff. At least this product's safe. Well, as far as I know. Some woodworm treatments containing lindane and certain other chemicals have been getting a very bad press recently. They may be no healthier for humans than they are for woodworms, so take care. Well, this should make them leave home. Well, I've built up the frame with timber to give us the correct height for the upholstery. This is not the expert's way, it's a bit sneaky, but it does work. And now we're ready for the next stage, which is the webbing, which will support the springs, and while we fit it, the bench will support the chair. This is webbing. You can get it in the long rolls or in these shorter bits. Be enough for a small job. Get the best you can. And there's the centre line of the frame. We're going to move just over an inch out and tack in a row of 4 tacks just outside the centre line. Right, 4 tacks in there. Now over to the other side. Don't cut it to length yet, otherwise you won't be able to stretch it. To help me stretch it, I've got this little block of wood here. There is a professional tool for this, but I haven't got one. So about ½ inch in from the inside edge, lay the webbing over, underneath, over the top again, grip it with your thumb, and now call on your knee to stretch it. Grip this leg here, otherwise it will come flying back on my face. There. That's good and taut. Now we're going to have to put 3 tacks in here. If the tack heads bend over, get them out because they can tear this. Professionals have a magnetic hammer, which means you don't have to hold it like this. Right, that's 3 tacks in there, and I can release the tension and cut it to length with a couple of inches overhang. Then we're going to fold that back and just secure it with 2 more tacks. And there we'll have built up this interwoven crisscross webbing all over the chair. There, the springs. Well, this old spring sprung its last. As I compress it, it keels over, has to be replaced. And if you're replacing one, you may as well replace the lot, because they're quite difficult to match. And we've got 4 new springs sitting in the chair here. And you can see that the knots, the top of the front and back ones, face each other. And to hold them on the chair, we're going to use this curved needle and twine. So hold the spring, and you can see it straddles 4 pieces of webbing. And then from underneath, push the needle through on the inside of the spring and take it back on the outside. Pull that through, let the needle drop, and we'll tie a loop knot. Draw that tight. Okay. And that's what I've done. There's one continuous piece of twine running right round the chair, holding each spring in 3 places and tied off at the end. Make sure you don't get any dangling loops under here. And on top, be certain that the twine doesn't go over these knots, because they can cut it. Now what I'm doing now is holding the springs upright. I've got the twine tacked at one end. It goes in a loop knot over the second coil, loop again here, over to this spring, round the 3rd coil, and tacked off again. And the knot I'm using, you can see here, it's just a simple loop. Now ease that back a bit wrap it round, tack it off, and then I'll do the same across here and here. With the springs held upright, we're ready to cover the whole lot with a layer of hessian that will stop the stuffing dropping through the springs and through the webbing. We've cut it well over size, haul it tight and compress the springs, and then using a smaller tack, hold it at the front, and I'm going to do the same here, here and here. I've trimmed the hessian, folded it back and tacked it, and as you can see, as we did below, we've got a continuous piece of twine holding each of the springs in 3 positions, and that's tied off at the end. Now I'm fitting this pre-formed roll around the edge, and you can see I've taken a nick out there so it'll take the corner. When we've got this on, we can put in the stuffing. Right, tease out the coconut fibre which we're going to use for stuffing. I've got a stitch running right around the chair here and across the diagonal, and that's holding the fibre which is tucked underneath it. Once I'd finished the stuffing, I covered it with another layer of heavy 10-ounce hessian and a layer of white fire retardant upholsterer's felt. Then I fixed a layer of calico on top, which should stop the stuffing coming through. Well, I've got the cover on, which is really satisfying. Now what I have to do is camouflage these tacks. I could do that with some decorative studs like these, but in fact I'm going to glue this braid in position, and then our chairs will be ready for number 50. Our lovely Corbel, guardian angel of the hallway, needs a twin to look at over the arch here in the entrance hall. I've cleaned off her face paint and she turns out to have classically fine features. The cleaning stage is all important, be thorough, because we're going to take a mould from this one so we can cast a plaster replica. The product we're using is good because we don't have to take the Corbel down. It goes by the glorious name of thixotropic moulding compound, easier to use than to say. Built up a moulding frame, it's hessian strips soaked in casting plaster, and this is plasterboard, and that gives us a nice square frame for the mould. The spray with this release agent should make sure that the moulding compound doesn't stick to the model. I'm applying the first coat of the moulding compound with a paintbrush, working it well into the fine detail. It's important to work it into the features, making sure you get rid of all air bubbles. Remember, this will be the surface of the cast. Any details missed now will be missing on the cast. This moulding and casting technique is in fact the one used by professional fibrous plasterers, but it is available for you to try for yourself. Wear gloves to protect your hands. Begin by covering the model with a thin overall layer. Then you can start building up the mould to a thickness of about 1/4 inch, 6 millimeters, reinforcing it with hessian strips, which act as a backing and strengthen the mould. The moulding compound is a 3-part system, so you can control the setting time to some extent. The more accelerator you add, the quicker it sets. You'll have plenty of time to build up the mould to your satisfaction. Well, she looks a bit strange now, mummified behind about 6 millimeters of mould. And in this freezing cold, I think this will take about 8 hours to dry. It's so cold in here that the mould's taken 2 days to harden, but now it's set and it's strange. I'm just trimming off the edges and these drips. As you can see, this mould is flexible, so we're going to build up a plaster case around it to stop it wobbling and distorting when we pour in the plaster cast. I painted on a thin layer of fine casting plaster, then built up the case to an overall thickness of about 1 inch. I had to work quickly as the plaster hardens fast, within minutes. Like the red mould it's covering and strengthening, the case is reinforced with strips of plaster-soaked hessian and full-face hessian layers. You can add wooden laths to give extra strength to a larger mould, as we did with the ceiling rose, for example. It set solid in about 20 minutes, and then we were ready to lift off the mould
and take the cast. This is an anxious moment. When it's free, carefully ease both plaster and mould away from the model, praying that you haven't damaged it. The model's features were unspoiled by the process. They had been well protected by the release agent, and the mould looked fine as we took it off the wall. The detail appeared to be there. We were about to find out. Build up a simple framework on the bench to support the mould and its plaster case while the cast is poured. I used chipboard and battens nailed to the bench. Place the mould and case in the frame and wedge it underneath. You can use more plaster and hessian for this support. When you are sure the case is level and stable, mix up your fine casting plaster. There's no need to paint the inside of the mould with the release agent, but before pouring the plaster in, paint the whole surface, once again making sure you work the brush well into the details. This will prevent the formation of air bubbles when you pour the cast. It's essential to mix up your plaster in a thoroughly clean container. Casting plaster normally hardens in under 10 minutes, so once again, work as quickly as you can. Fill the mould with plaster up to the edge. Before it hardens completely, score the back of the cast to provide a key to help you when you fix it to the wall, if it's worked. This is the most emotionally fraught stage of the entire process, the removal of the mould and the revelation of the new face beneath. The plaster case came off first after a little encouragement, and then there was only the red mould between us and our new corbel. This must be how a plastic surgeon feels. Has it worked? Will the nose break off? Will her face be pitted with air bubbles? Take care. To my relief and delight, the cast was a good one. All the detail was there. There were a couple of minor pimples of plaster, but these were easily trimmed off with a sharp knife. The edge was neatened off, and I was ready to fix the new corbel opposite the original. Well, this is it. Finally got it on the wall. It's held with a couple of brass screws which won't rust and stain it. I can cover the heads with some filler, and there's tile adhesive here to hold it extra tight. Well, it's an enjoyable process, and the results are really satisfying. Every detail's here, and we finally have symmetrical corbels in the hall.
Well, number 50 is a typical late Victorian terrace, and there are thousands of these houses all over the country, and they're getting highly sought after now, especially for families. Well, this house is owned by British Gas, and it's going to be a show home, and it's now finished, so let's take a look at some of their ideas for a low-budget, efficient heating system. Well, it's certainly nice and warm in here. They haven't in fact installed an entire central heating system in the house. It would cost in this one about £2,000 and be quite expensive to run. So they've come up with an economical solution. And it happens behind this cupboard. It's just a neat little boiler. This one will provide the hot water for the entire house and feed 4 radiators in selected rooms. And this system will cost just over £900. And it's supplemented in the kitchen, because there isn't a radiator here, by a gas fire. And as this kitchen's been enough to eat in, you've got instant cosy heat, and it will ventilate the room like all gas fires do. So that's the kitchen. Let's take a look at the rest of the house. Well, this is my favourite room, the den right at the top of the house, but because it is an attic, that could cause problems for heating. So we've gone for, here, instant heat, because it's a room that you wouldn't want to heat all the time, in the form of this fire, which you may remember I demonstrated at Interbuild. And the special feature of this fire is that it doesn't have to be against an outside wall, and the excess products go out through a flue which goes under the floor. It goes through the attic, which has got extra insulation to keep in the heat, and out through a pipe into the gas, into the open air, and the water into the gutter. And you end up with a very cosy room. Well, this is where the tank for the main central heating system is stored on the top landing. You'll notice it's very well insulated, and it's got a special feature in it to give you low-cost, high-pressure showers. The system works not from a pump, but directly from the cold water main supply. Now, the cold water comes in here. It goes into the tank, where inside there is a special coil which converts the cold water into hot. It comes out through this pipe, through a thermostat, and then down into the bathroom, where you've got as many showers as you like, lots of pressure, and at a fraction of the cost. Well, now we're in the traditional bedroom with the old traditional fireplace here, but it's been painted pink, purely decorative. It's not going to be used, because in here we're using one of the radiators. There's one in each of the other bedrooms and one in the bathroom. That's because they're working on the principle of timed heating. You know pretty much when you're going to be here, when you need it to be hot, and so you just set it on the thermostat over there on the wall, and also it still heats your water when you don't need to use your radiators. So it's economical. And here in the dining room we've got a different source of heat. It's a living flame effect fire. Now, this isn't new, we've seen these before, but some of them can be not very attractive to look at and very inefficient, not giving off much heat. But this one is very stylish. Look at it. It's just like an old traditional fireplace. So you could say it's got the period look and none of the muck. And it also gives off the heat of a normal gas fire. So, like most things in number 50 in the heating system, it's been designed for efficiency, style, and hopefully it won't burn too big a hole in your pocket.
Well, we're opening the door on number 50 for the last time. It's repaired and decorated, fitted, furnished, finished, or will be when I've taken this chair inside. So there's no work today. Instead, we're going to have a look at the fruits of our labour. The floor tiles in the hall look good again, don't they? We've kept and restored as many original features as possible and added some, so we not only have colour glass here, we have our new number 50 leaded light over the front door, and that was made by Nick Bayliss, who taught us the techniques a few weeks ago. Well, there's more than one way to make an old house habitable, as we'll see now. Most of the work at number 50 was carried out by British Gas, who are going to use it as a show house. They renovated and repaired the structure as economically as possible and added a Victorian touch in the choice of fabrics and decorations. Well, do you remember this attic? There were holes in the roof, heavy evidence of pigeons on the floor. Well, now it's made a really nice room, and it shows that attention to detail does pay off. For example, this moulding on the beam has really integrated it in the room. Now, they've also renovated other rooms we saw before work began. The dining room, where we removed the fireplace to refit it in the front room, and you can still see the shape of the arch I revealed. The kitchen, which was wet and infested when we first came here, and even Harry couldn't save the quarry tiles on the floor, but the modern replacement works well. They also designed all the bedrooms, except one, which we'll see in a minute. The front bedroom and the front room downstairs were designed by Judith and Martin Miller, best known for the Antique Price Guide and the book Period Details, which carries their name. They're experts in the elements of Victorian style, and they used that expertise to create the Victorian feel in the rooms they designed. They've given the living room the full-blown Victorian treatment, but the bedroom manages to marry Victorian ideas and modern ones, and they're waiting for us and our chair in that bedroom. Well, here's my contribution. Martin, ready for us to look at yours?
Here it is.
Yeah, it's pretty, isn't it? And is that what you were after?
Yes, it was, yeah. In this room, obviously it's a bedroom and it needs to be feminine, but we're looking for the real Victorian feel, and the Victorian flavour of a house is very much made up of lots of knickknacks all over the place, the walls filled with prints, you don't want to see the wallpaper.
Well, there's a problem about a look that relies on a lot of things. You've got to buy them, and that's a real problem if you're on a tight budget. How did you approach that?
It wasn't really that much of a problem at all. It was actually, we went to antique shops and junk shops and auction rooms. It only took about 2 days, and we got a lot of things in this room much cheaper than we thought.
And did you enjoy it?
Oh, it was great fun. I think going around to auctions and leaving bids, or actually going to the auction and bidding yourself, that really does give you a great amount of pleasure, and you can get really hooked on it. And that's why maybe the Victorian feel is a really good idea, because you can really buy a lot of clutter quite easily and very cheaply.
That wallpaper doesn't look as if it's from an auction or an antique shop, though.
No, it's not. It's quite a nice, subtle 19th century reproduction. It's a specialist paper. It's not one you pick up in any do-it-yourself shop, but it's not expensive. It's about £10 a roll, and they're worth looking around for. But we've cut a lot of corners here. We've tried to do things really on the budget. Good. And you probably noticed a lot of lace around.
I have noticed it all over the walls.
Over the top of lace. But then if you use it to this effect, it's pure Victorian, and then you can run it through with modern lace on the windows.
Yes, because we decided here not to use actual curtains here because we thought, one, this looks very Victorian, but also it's very much cheaper than curtains would probably cost £300, £400 for a window like this. This cost £100 just with the blind behind. And we got some really good buys at auction, like this little commode, which we got for £32, which makes a really good plant pot.
Yeah, that was a good buy. And this little gypsy table, that was only £30. But the plant actually cost us more than the gypsy table and the hat box put together.
In that case, it certainly cost more than that pair of wicker chairs there, which were a bit grubby, but it was just a matter of spraying them with paint. They're light and easy to move around the room. Right, well, this should fill up that nasty black hole. Yeah, it does. That's because we had to block in the flue. There's an air brick down there. Remember, the original fireplace was stolen from here, so this is a Victorian replacement. Had it shot blasted clean. Looks okay. Now, I thought that you'd been tearing up old books.
No. These the prints actually are just from a modern book on flower prints. The frames are off-the-shelf frames, and total price about £7 each. And there's what, 30 of them in here. It makes a nice, nice unified collection.
It does. Well, the picture over the bed, I think, is particularly apt.
Yes, the Victorians loved their wedding photographs, so we thought that was quite a nice one to put up there. And we've just put this modern machine-made lace round it to sort of drape it a bit. And the bed was the most expensive thing we bought for the room. I think we paid about £150 for that. But the bedspread's modern. I mean, it's just modern lace and from High Street shop, and it's about £35. And it looks really quite good.
It does.
And of course, no bedroom's complete without its teddy bear.
Yeah, here we have our new corbel, smiling at the original over there. It's made a pleasing arch, I think.
Yes, it has. We've used the burgundy drape behind it just to make it really stand out.
And we've pulled the burgundy again in the wallpaper.
Yeah, this frieze here makes this dado much wider, doesn't it?
Yeah. Right. You can see we've got the embossed paper beneath, and we've got that again, but in a much better quality out in the lobby, where that's the sort of the prestige part.
So this dado rail we've done with quite a light treatment, whereas in here we've done a very much darker colour and also this much more interesting effect.
Yeah, it's been scumbled, hasn't it, for a two-tone effect.
That's right.
Well, this dado rail, is a do-it-yourself kit, but I don't think it's ever looked like this before. Well, Queen Victoria might not recognise some of the things upstairs, but I think she'd feel more than at home down here.
Yes, and I think Albert would as well. This thing is a masculine room, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's dark and with a cluttered Victorian feel to it. But we've mixed in, you can see over there, we've got a whatnot, which is full of little family portraits and clutter. Beside that, you've got a commode, ideal place for your firelighters. You've got the candle box. And over onto the mantelpiece again, the slate clock, spelter figures, just typical Victorian clutter. And above it, the candle sconces, which give a very good effect. And they're only £8 each.
But even larger things are not necessarily expensive. I mean, you can pick up sofas for £100, and you don't necessarily have to have them matching the chairs because you can use shawls to cover them up until you can afford to have them reupholstered, which can be quite expensive.
Yeah, these are new, aren't they? And in fact, when I look closely, I can see a lot of this is not really Victorian, but you've used simple Victorian ideas and techniques to create this effect that you wanted. Well, these are also quite cheap, what, £7? But some of it's more expensive than that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, just those chairs over there, those two are actually part of a set of 4, and they were just over £200. But the table was nothing, cheap fabric on it, nice little jardiniere. Then again, the lace, not expensive, moving up to just decorative drapes. They're not functional, but they do give again the true Victorian feel of a bay window with the tassel detail, and the whole of the effect gives a privacy in the daytime, which you obviously need. But then at night, of course, the whole room takes on a whole new world. You've got the candlelight, the whole intimacy of it, which is very Victorian indeed.
But it was very easy, and that's what we really want to get across, is that it's not something terribly difficult. Anybody can do it and get some real fun out of it as well.
Absolutely.
For our final trick, we stay in Victorian style to reveal a very non-Victorian feature hidden behind the fabric. We've learned a lot about Victorian houses over the past few months, and I know I speak for everybody who's been involved when I say that we have really enjoyed it.